Well, hey there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Andrew and Jerry Save the World. I'm Andrew Langer.
I remain the one and the only Jerry Rogers.
I was talking to you about you on the air yesterday. We'll get to that in a second. This is episode 94. You know, Jerry, we are much in the same way that Ovi is just a few goals shy of setting the Wayne Gretzky record. We are a few episodes shy of the magic number of 100 episodes. We need to think about what we're going to do for the 100th episode. Maybe that's when we unveil our new Andrew and Jerry caricatures. But
At,
episode,
at, at the very least, we have to have balloons.
yes, you know something that we'll make that background. Um,
You ever see
so
that movie City Island?
no, I remember. Yes, I remember City Island, and I remember City Hall.
Well, City Island, it takes place on City Island in the
Yes.
Bronx, and the Andy Garcia plays the patriarch, and he's a prison guard, and he brings someone home, someone special home, and he says to his wife, "Let's make dinner special tonight," and she's like, "What? What? You want balloons?"
Oh, those weird Andy Garcia performances where he's trying to do something that he isn't. It's very, very strange. You know,
Well,
he's in
he was great in City Island. He was
he's
great.
great in
One of
the
our
TV show
favorite.
Landman. He's the sort of
Oh,
the. Have
Andy
you watched
Garcia's in Landman.
in at the end of the first
Oh,
season
he
of
plays
Landman,
the cartel
the
guy.
cartel guy? It's
Oh,
quite
you're right.
exciting.
Oh,
Anyway,
yes.
all right. Andrew and Jerry bring a moment of clarity or offer a moment of clarity because we this really is the silly season, is it not, Jerry? I mean, in the last 24 hours, everybody is going crazy. And the reality is, right, at the very least, if you're concerned about the stock market, every investment advisor I've ever talked to over the years says if you're worried about the market, then wait out the market because the market is going to turn. We are not about to enter the Great Depression. We are not about to. I don't think we're going to enter a recession. But the reality is, you hold on to your assets. Now is the time, frankly, if you're not investing in the market, to invest in the market. But listen. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm just a guy, so don't take my words as gospel. But Jerry, I
And
mean,
and also, but there's a lot of misinformation and, dare I say, false narratives and untruths in this debate. Because if you look at Wall Street, you look at the numbers, sure, there's been a dip, but
right,
compare it to the mid years, the mid years of the Biden administration, and the market is up
Jerry,
compared to the Biden years. And so again,
let's
this is political rhetoric. This is political theater that we're playing. And let me just say one thing:
yeah,
when it
because I
comes
got a
to
question for you, an
when it
important.
comes to
Go ahead.
trade and tariffs, screw Wall Street.
Yeah,
I mean, absolutely. I mean, they have been the beneficiaries of so-called free trade
mm,
for decades now. And again, if you don't believe me, look at COVID and how Wall Street did well while Main Street had to shut down.
right. It's the hold on. It's the idea. Excuse me. It's the idea of cronyism at its worst, right? If the markets were the barometer of everything about the economy, if the stock markets were the barometer, and keeping in mind that I again ran some numbers yesterday, and all of our stock markets combined in America are valued at about $60 trillion. But here's my point. I don't want to go down these numbers because I really do have an important question to sort of kick this off, Jerry. But let me just say this much because of the transfusion of cash that can come out of the government and into the hands of a lot of these entities that are publicly traded, anytime there is an effort to ratchet down on government spending and that transfusion of money out of the public's pockets and the treasury into the hands of these private companies, of course they're going to scream bloody murder. And of course they're going to take a hit on this. That doesn't mean that it's bad policy. But Jerry, let me ask you this, because I think we may get some new listeners as a result of my stints this week on the radio. A lot of our old listeners are clamoring for more content from you and me. You are, in addition to doing your radio work, you are the editor of both Real Clear Policy and Real Clear Health. And you and I have glossed over the fact over the years. We mention it in passing that you read everything. Um, and you just talked about misinformation and disinformation and uncertainty. So, as the editor of Real Clear Policy, besides Real Clear Policy, obviously, what are your trusted sources of information? How do folks actually get this clarity? How do they go through, separate the wheat from the chaff and all this?
You go to Real Clear Policy.
I understand, but what, yes,
Because there is
yeah,
no
of course.
one. I'll give you an example.
Yeah,
I like National Review
yeah,
as a center right, uh, common sense conservatism at National Review. However, even National Review this week, um, they're raising the alarm. This is the end of the economy. Tariffs. We're going to have a Great Depression. And then you have another piece from our friend Jim Garrity
yeah,
saying, well, wait a second here. Reagan slapped tariffs and protective measures against Japan, and Reagan is considered a free trader. The fact is that Europe, Asia, Canada are engaged in unfair trade practices. And why shouldn't an American president, an American Congress, why shouldn't they put the American worker first? So even at National Review, there's hysteria, and then there's a more kind of reasoned approach. And so what I do, since you mentioned it,
right,
I read everything, and I pick the very best. And again, it's a mix of center right. I look for the best on the center left. There's been some reasonable uh, commentary on trade and tariffs from the left. Of all places, MSNBC
yeah,
has been interesting here because remember, it was Democrats up until yesterday who thought trade policy should be leveraged to help benefit the American worker.
right.
Now, all of a sudden, Trump is doing this, and you see not just Republican establishment types, but also the Democratic Party in total just coming out. And it's not just, and here's what bothers me,
Yeah,
it's not just a reasonable argument because there are things Trump is pushing with his trade policy that I have great concerns, and we could talk
sure.
about those things. But I'm not going to call him names. I'm not going to say this is a dictatorship. I'm not going to say this is the end of the economy. And that's the problem with our debate, which is why I'm having a difficult time answering your question in terms of
No,
the best sources. The problem is that everywhere there's hysteria on
right.
both the right and the left.
Which
And
is why I this is why I've titled the show what I've titled it today, and why I'm asking you this question,
I tell
because
you
I
what,
think it's
though, for
important.
our listeners, and I can make a list of this, and Andrew and I can
I think
share
you
it up
should.
up at X. Where I get the best information today, Substack.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
various independent sources, again, ranging from Josh Barrow on the left to Matt Taibbi on the right. And by the
yes,
way, Matt Taibbi up until yesterday was a leftist as well. So maybe
right.
he's not a center right. But my point is that Substack, independent voices are giving us the best information.
Well, I mean, it really is the weaponization. You know, we've talked about the weaponization of the hot take in the past, right?
Everything's a hot
The
take now.
concept of if
Everything
it bleeds, it
everywhere.
leads. But let me get into something, because you talk about the disconnect, and I think you're absolutely right. I had a conversation yesterday with Doug Holtz-Eakin, who I have great respect for as an economist. He has the American Action Forum, which I still think that he should have gotten together with Pence's people and figured out how they could do advancing American freedom in the American Action Forum without having the same initials. But set that aside. And, he is obviously raising the alarm about tariffs. Um, and I asked him about tariffs in the context, his colleague at American Action Forum, almost confused them again. Dan Goldbeck has done great research into the issue of regulatory costs and the impact of regulatory costs in the economy. And frankly, I have relied on Dan's numbers, because at the end of the day, his numbers have jibed with mine. Obviously it's some kind of confirmation bias there. But Dan Goldbeck put the increase in regulatory costs by the Biden administration in their 4 years in office at 1.8 trillion, which means that federal regulations now directly cost the American economy about $4 trillion annually. I don't want to throw a lot of numbers at people, but my point is, I asked Doug Holtz-Eakin about this, about Dan's research on regulation and the issue of regulatory costs. And it was at least somewhat clear to me, or at least implied to me, and I got to go back and listen to the interview. Maybe it wasn't as clear as I thought it was, that that Doug Holtz-Eakin hadn't really thought about the balance here, that he, like a lot of other people, are just taking the tariffs issue in isolation. Those of you who are listening, and I'm seeing I'm making weird gestures with my hand, they're taking them in isolation and not adding into this everything else that sort of goes into what the economic health and economic vitality is. I had a conversation with a colleague this morning, once again coming back to something we've talked about, which is the issue of the regulatory glide path, which is to say, if you keep regulatory costs constant over time, what's the delta between the stable regulatory costs and the trajectory that a Barack Obama or a Joe Biden was putting us on? And those are important economic gains. And obviously, I think, I could talk about my numbers and what they would say. And obviously, it's all somewhere in the middle here. But again, to me, it gives us pause. But, it's like there's so much out there, right? The chart, Jerry, that the president put out 2 days ago, as we tape this on Friday, the 4th of April. The chart the president put out, and then very snarkily, you had other groups say, well, here, I've corrected the chart for you, and this is what the tariffs really are. I mean, this is a problem because no one knows where to get the actual answers from.
Right. And everyone has an axe to grind. Everyone wants the headline. Uh, Media companies want the ratings. And so instead of having an informed conversation about tariffs, trade, the economy, the American worker, manufacturing, supply chain, instead, it's just blaring ridiculous hot takes and headlines. It's very frustrating because serious people are also now engaged in the look at my headline.
Yeah.
The bottom line is this.
Mm.
We don't have free trade. So anyone who argues that we need free trade, Trump is at odds with free trade, well, then show me free trade.
Right.
Because again, the American worker has suffered under high tariffs and trade war for decades and decades. Again, while Wall Street is making money, Main Street is closing down, and that is literal.
Yeah.
Look at the manufacturing base in this country. I think up until recently, the average was we lose 9,000 manufacturing jobs a day. Now, that's a stat that I remember from prep work on one of my radio shows, so
Right.
I'll double check that. But my point is that we lose thousands of manufacturing jobs a day. Let me just throw something at you.
Please.
Number one, Reagan. Everyone says we should go back to Reagan. Trump is at odds with Reagan. We used to be the party of free trade and markets, and Reagan and Trump has changed the party. Go back and you look at Reagan's record. No other person but the expert on Reagan, Steve Hayward, has a great piece at Civitas talking about how, yeah, Reagan used the rhetoric and wanted to
Literally,
engage
if you can't see it,
in,
literally right here under my microphone, the age of Reagan.
right. Reagan wanted free trade. In fact, many of his actions in the 80s led to more free liberalized trade in the 90s. It was Reagan in the early part of the 80s who began the groundwork for NAFTA. So Reagan's bona fides on free trade are on a shelf like trophies.
Right.
However, Reagan also slapped big tariffs on Japan.
Right.
He also went after countries and negotiated and used tariffs as leverage to free up other economies.
Well,
This
it
is
also,
what this is
sorry.
what Trump is attempting to do. But the difference is Reagan didn't have a 24/7 news cycle and social media, and he wasn't labeled the devil. And this is part of the problem here. And that is Folks are against something not because it's right or wrong, but because its source is Donald Trump, and this is really polluting the public discussion.
Well, and we have to remember that we learn things over time, right? That in the space of 40 years, and the fact that, our information moves at the speed of light, and the technologies have changed, and the regulatory climate has changed. I know I keep coming back to regulations. We know that our theories about trade policy and regulatory policy and economic policy and labor policy, they have to change and adapt over time. Something you and I have talked about a great deal, right? We were in favor of free trade, and we are in favor of free trade,
Of course,
provided that there's a level playing field. But we were taught many, when you and I were both in school, and you were starting college. Well, actually, both of us started college in the 80s, the late 80s, and into the 90s. We were both learning. We were told, because we understood at the time, or at least we thought at the time, that freer trade led to freer economies, and freer economies led to greater political freedom. And now we understand that that's not necessarily the case,
no,
right?
it's absolutely not the case because,
Yes,
again, case in point is China.
absolutely. This is where I
I
was going.
mean,
And
uh,
Russia, but China,
uh,
yes.
yeah, I mean, absolutely. And the fact of the matter is, we most nation favored status with China. And the fact of the matter is,
Hold
our
on, Jerry.
greatest geopolitical enemy today, rival today, is China.
Let me explain this for a second so folks really understand this. The theory was that by engaging in greater trade with these communist nations, that it would give their peoples a taste of sort of Western values and Western economics and what the West could provide. And certainly there was that instance, I think more so in Russia, and they were clamoring for this. But the Chinese Communist Party was smarter.
Yeah,
And they recognized that what they would do is they would blend, they would fold in certain elements of capitalism and capitalist desires into their state-run economy, so that all of this could be done in the greater service of the CCP. And so it led to, you had these massive technological advances, and great products and consumerism accrued to the Chinese public. Well, the Chinese government, the CCP, recognized, okay, well, we can placate our country with so much consumerism. At the same time, we're going to strip them of their freedoms. And unfortunately,
right.
that is turning around and now being
You,
adopted
uh,
here in the
uh,
United States.
and what you said here
Yeah.
needs to be underlined, and that is,
Yeah. Thank you.
do not mistake consumerism for capitalism, or
Right.
consumerism for freedom. And
Ding,
here's
ding,
the
ding.
thing, and here's the thing too. Our trade policy with China over the past, I want to say 30 years, Andrew, um, back when we were both at the Competitive Enterprise Institute, and CEI was arguing for most favored status for China. And I remember arguing with the Fred Smiths and the Jonathan Adlers and others who said, "You don't understand, Jerry. Free markets, free people." And I said, "Well, no, because the communists are ideological. This is their religion, and what they'll do is we'll provide them the bullets that they'll shoot us with someday." And here
Jerry,
we are 30 years later, and literally China is an economic powerhouse, largely on the back of the United States, not just in terms of our trade policy with them, but because we've allowed them to steal our intellectual property, steal our innovation. And I want to say one thing here
yeah,
too, just before it jumps out of my mind.
please.
I think the United States should defend Taiwan, and continue to partner with Taiwan, because Taiwan is a free country. I don't believe in two Chinas. I believe that Taiwan is an independent nation, and as such, we should recognize that and support that. That being said, however, I don't think we should go to war with China over semiconductor chips.
Right.
And right now, because of the unfair trade policies over the last 30 years, America is wholly dependent upon Taiwan for semiconductor chips.
Right.
And so, therefore, if China takes Taiwan, we don't have a source, a supply chain. We don't have manufacturing for semiconductor chips. This
Right.
is why Donald Trump, part of the reason why Donald Trump, remember, it's not just, nothing's in a vacuum, like you said.
Absolutely.
His trade policy is connected to his foreign policy. He's not a neocon. He doesn't want forever wars. And Trump understands that we might have to go to war with China if China takes Taiwan, not because Taiwan is a free and independent state, but rather because America is dependent upon those semiconductors.
Well, this gets
And
into
this is the
yeah.
problem with everyone who says what Trump is doing is wrong. Fine, make that argument, but tell me what you've been doing right,
Well,
because I don't see it.
and this gets into a conversation I had with a caller probably on Tuesday on WCBM, which is, this caller called in and said, "Well, there are things we can't make here anymore," and he was building on.
Nonsense. We
Yeah,
could make
agreed.
anything here.
Right, right. He was building on this idea of, and rightly so, that part of the reason why we have a Rust Belt is,
It's because of bad trade policy over 40 years.
well, no, it's
That's
also
why.
because we have a regulatory policy. We were
Yeah, yes,
stopping
but
rivers from
again,
catching on fire.
and
But
again,
my point,
wait, so our
yeah,
audience knows. Andrew and I get it.
yeah.
Foreign policy, manufacturing policy, trade policy, regulatory policy, these things are all connected. However, for the sake of our argument, for the sake of conversation, we need to talk about them in isolation. The fact of the matter is, Andrew, and I'll let you finish, but the
Yeah.
fact is that the reason why America was able to create the war machine to defeat Nazism in the 1940s is because we did produce everything.
And this gets to my point is that, if there's anything that we should have learned from the pandemic and the shutting down of our ports is that this nation is incredibly vulnerable if there is some kind of an event which prevents us from being able to import goods that we absolutely need. And we should never become entirely dependent upon any nation for any
And
single source
and
of
we are,
products.
Andrew.
And we are. And
Yes.
and so this gets into, why I was convinced a few years back to rethink my position on the Jones Act, which is a 1908 law, a very obscure law, less obscure now than I think it was back then, but which essentially says that if you want to be licensed as a ship in the United States, right? If you want to be flagged with the United States flag as a ship and travel in between ports in the United States, well, then your ship has to have been built in the United States and it has to be captained by someone who's a United States citizen. And there are folks who are very unhappy about this. Our good friends, our libertarian friends, have been trying to fight to get rid of the Jones Act for a very long time. And as other folks have pointed out to me, we cannot become dependent. Let's say for a moment that we go to war with China. Now, China is not Korea, but if most of our ships are being built in Korea and they have to traverse the Pacific Ocean in order to get here, we've got a huge vulnerability if we go to war with China and we have to get our ships from there. And it's not something that we can ramp up immediately, right? It's something that we need to have folks who understand how to build ships and how to repair ships, how to maintain ships, et cetera. And they have to be able to do it here at home. And that's a skill that we have lost over a great deal of time. And so that opens it up on these other things. Listen, I get it. You don't think we can make toilet paper here at home. And maybe, but I do think toilet paper is a necessity. I'm not going to say it's not a necessity.
During COVID, it
So
certainly was.
well, that's exactly it. So at the very least, we should be able to do these things here at home, or nearby in Canada
Andrew,
or Mexico.
so we started the program off saying clarity, right?
Yes.
Part of the challenge, here's my criticism of Donald Trump, the administration, and how they're rolling this out. And this is also connected to how they're rolling out Doge, how they're rolling out the reset and
Right.
cuts and job force reductions in the public health agencies. And that is, there is no strategic communication.
Right.
Again, let me take a step back
Yeah.
to just context of the conversation. As we're talking about trade and the hysteria over Trump's trade announcements and policies, there is hysteria over cuts at FDA and NIH and the public health entities.
Yes.
Now, the fact of the matter is, and because I do read everything, there are scientists and physicians, Martin Kulldorff, Vinay Prasad, and others, who are saying that here's the strategy for NIH, here's the strategy for moving forward in public health. Don't ask yourself the question or exclaim, "Oh my goodness, we're cutting FDA." Ask yourself, what were these jobs?
Right.
What were these grants for? Did they advance science or not? And if the answer, and more often than not, the answer is no, they're not advancing science. Well, then these job cuts and these other cuts in spending are wholly
My
appropriate.
my my
But
favorite hold on. My favorite one of my favorite moments this week was a video from one of the Tesla takedowns in Northern Virginia, and a guy just sort of carping about Elon Musk being a Nazi, and then he says, "And this woman here," and I think we don't know if it's his wife or whatever. He's pointing to it. We are left to assume it's his wife. She lost a $35 million grant from the NIH, and I'm thinking, okay, dude, you now have just completely proved the point as to why these cuts are happening because
yeah,
you got this woman screaming at the top of her lungs outside of a Tesla dealership. I want to know what her grant was for, what her $35
right.
million
But
dollar grant was for.
but again, this is the central problem.
Right.
Ms. Levitt, I forget her first name now, the White
Caroline
House.
Leavitt. Yeah. For Caroline
She's
Leavitt.
doing wonderfully from the White
Agreed.
House. But remember, RFK Jr. needs his own communication strategy. And the same thing with the trade agencies, and that's not happening.
And
All
ICE,
commu
right? I mean,
Yes,
yeah.
but let's just connect a couple of things here. So we have trade and tariffs, and everything's exploding. We have what's happening with the public health entities, the cuts and the frozen research grants, etc., and everything's exploding. We also have a Doge, and everything's exploding. We also have this idea that Trump is trying to purge history. Everything's exploding with
Right.
the pushing back on DEI. Uh, this is all connected. This is a multi-pronged attack from the left. Now on trade, they're getting a lot of help from Republican establishment types.
Right.
But let me give you an example, just again, to give me context of how our public discussion has become nonsensical and comical in all political theater. The U.S. military has a U.S. military Office of Public Information.
Yes.
There's a really good piece at Real Clear Defense, up at Real Clear Policy, that exposes this agency within the U.S. Department, U.S. Pentagon, the
DOD,
U.S. military.
the Defense Department. Yeah.
It is filled with leftists, similar to government workers across the government.
Which, hold on. Let me just add context here. Just hold the thought, because this is what Barack Obama was doing.
Yes,
It was a concerted effort on the part of the White House under Barack Obama, was to make sure that as many of these leftists were put in key positions at DOD.
everywhere
Go ahead.
at
Yes.
HHS, at
Yep.
DOD, at everywhere. Another reason why the across the board job cuts is a good idea, because these are all leftists embedded in government. It started, by the way, in
Right.
the Clinton administration. Bill Clinton understood after the '94 election that Democrats were no longer going to control uh, the Congress. There will be times when Republicans will win majorities. So Clinton started this effort to embed progressives, liberals into all the government agencies. So there would be a perpetual Democrat government, liberal government, progressive government. Obama accelerated it, and Biden, by the way, his 4 years in office saw the greatest increase in the hiring of federal workers in 40 years. In fact, for a single administration, a 4 year period, it was the greatest increase in history.
Yeah.
So my point is that the left uses the federal workforce to advance their political agenda. But back to the DOD. So the DOD, its Office of Public Information, is embedded with these progressives. And so when the orders came down from Trump to push out DEI, what they did was they purposefully
Right.
got rid of Colin Powell. They purposefully got rid of the other parts of African American
The
history.
Navajo Wind Talkers. Yeah.
And it
Yes.
was
Yeah.
nonsense. It was never part. It was never Trump's purpose was never to erase history, but to stop the DEI madness.
In
But again, uh, this same thing is happening across the government, where you have almost the enemy within
So,
fighting
which
against
is
Trump.
really interesting, and that gets into now whether, because I do have a secondary question to this, because this is what we saw in the interregnum between when Kamala Harris lost the election in November and when Joe Biden left office in January, was the concerted effort to enact policies that were going to do what
Right.
they could to stymie the incoming presidency. But it's really interesting, Jerry, because this was part of my conversation with Doug Holtz-Eakin. Because I asked about this issue of political appointees being frustrated in the ability to do their jobs by the careers. And he talked about OMB, and I think OMB is an outlier, and he never experienced this, and he thinks that most federal workers, he was giving the federal workers the benefit of the doubt. And I think, by and large, right, let's say 99%, 95% of the federal workforce is not political. That
I'm not,
5% can.
again, I don't agree with that
No,
premise.
no, but here's my point. I found it very odd, especially when you consider, I want to say it's David Bernhardt. He wrote a book called "You Report to Me." The gentleman who was he was the Interior Secretary under Donald Trump literally wrote a book about this. I mean, you and I know of colleagues in Republican administrations, whether it was during George W. Bush or during the first Trump term, they would go into these agencies, EPA, Interior, Energy, et cetera, and they would be trying to enact reforms, and they would be stymied by career bureaucrats, senior career bureaucrats who would slow walk all of these things. But let me ask you this, Jerry, because you and I have had this discussion since Donald Trump took office and since Doge came into power. And I've voiced the fact that I would prefer if things moved on in a more deliberative fashion, right? If we set goals and we ask agency heads to do this. And you and I've had these conversations. So I'm once again going to ask you this question. Should they have waited a little more until more of these senior political appointees were filled? Because right now we have agency heads and we have some sub-agency heads who were put in, but we don't have the political appointees to head up these offices. We don't have the comms people in many cases in these departments. Should we have waited a little longer before enacting some of these sweeping changes?
No,
Okay.
because
Because it just seems to me just a moment ago you were saying just the opposite, but
no,
go
I
ahead.
mean, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I look, the communications folks are in place
Yeah.
at HHS. Their communications shop is in place. They're just not. They're just not responding. They're behind. I'll give you an example.
Yep. Okay.
At HHS. So there is a communications director there. There's a whatever the title is, Assistant Secretary for Communications. It's a close ally of RFK, someone who's worked with him for years. And she has a staff, and they're up and going. And they had a recent event at HHS, Maha Moms,
Okay.
bringing in all these mothers and talking about nutrition and health and children. And it was perfect politically, perfect for a photo op, perfect for a news cycle. Guess what the communication staff did not have? They never invited media,
Yeah.
and they did not have a photographer at the event.
Wait. They didn't even have a photographer. Were they just
They
relying
did
on
not
folks with their cameras?
no media
Okay. No
strategy,
me. Well, I
Andrew.
understand. Yes.
But my
Yes. You know,
point is,
folks
is
with their
that you
phones. I
can't.
guess they were. Yeah.
So don't let's not
Okay.
say this isn't because we don't have the staff in place when the staff in place is just
Okay. I'm just.
incompetent.
Yeah. All right.
This is a broadly speaking, even Trump's tariff formula, right? There's all kinds of reports that we now have higher tariffs on Israel than Iran, that we're putting tariffs on countries that have brought down tariffs. My point is that uh, there seems to be a little bit of incompetence that runs through Trump world.
Well, I mean, certainly.
And I agree with the policies and I agree with the president, but the problem is it's always it's not even in the rollout or the implementation. It is the communication.
Right.
Like for instance, why doesn't someone from the administration, when they're saying, because Trump has already said, screw Wall Street. Yeah, you might pay more for a foreign car. So Trump has conceded the argument that some goods might cost more. However, why doesn't someone in the administration make your argument? Why is it that you and
Right.
I are making you're making this argument on this podcast about the regulatory versus the tariff trade-offs. This
Right.
is something they should be leading with.
No, yeah, agree. Well, listen, I'm gonna toot my own horn and say, Jerry, I don't think beyond me, I'm not sure anybody else is thinking about it
But
in
that's
that
but
regard,
you but you're
which is a
but you're
problem.
proving my point.
No, no, no. But I mean, I don't necessarily expect any administration to think about
I
this, but
do. Oh,
it's
oh, please, come on. It's again, no, not one economic factor makes the economy,
right.
and the fact that we
Well,
don't have
yeah, I will say, but here's the thing, right?
Andrew, it's what you said is a brilliant idea, is a great idea,
thank you.
and but look, but don't it's not so unique to you. This is something that smart people in administration should have figured out.
Well, okay, thank you, Jerry. I appreciate that. But having labored in the fallow fields of regulation for a
But
very
but
long time,
but
listen, we all
Andrew,
hold on, hold
so
on.
no one, no, wait, time. So no one in the administration has the experience in the regulatory regime as you.
No, no. Here's the thing, right? I don't think at the end of the day that folks are making these kinds of arguments. I will raise it with.
But you're right. But that's the problem. We don't have strategic communication. We don't have smart
Okay, I mean, but
on your
that's my.
feet
I guess that's the
thinkers.
other part of this. It's a thing. I think you hit the nail on the head here. Let me just underscore what you're saying here, right? So so there should have been an event where they had a briefing with everybody who deals with regulatory economics, and they should be bringing them in and having them on distribution lists and getting a hold of them on a regular basis. In the same way, right? You're a weekly talk radio host in a top 30 market in the United States. Have you received any
No,
communications from the White House communications
no.
office offering up guests to you? Right. They should have the experts and the
But this
surrogates, right?
is
They hold on. They should have taken the list that they had. And maybe you and I are not as important enough to be on this list. I think you would be over me because you're on a station on a regular basis. But right, the RNC, the Trump 47 election radio distribution list, if they had one, should be on the White House. But
Andrew.
we're not getting those things. You should have
Andrew.
surrogates. Anyway, go ahead.
Fred Smith said this: the left is vertically integrated,
Right. And we've said this before here on the
and they work
podcast.
together. They share. Look at after the Cory Booker filibuster that wasn't a filibuster, that accomplished nothing.
Wait,
Look at
wait.
the.
Hold on, Jerry. You're saying that it didn't change the course of history as Frank Luntz claimed?
I know, so silly. But here's the thing: if you look at the news coverage and you look at Democratic talking points the next day, everyone was singing from the same choir book.
Right.
Donald Trump has a huge liberation day. Every single right of center substacker, media person, radio host, producer, etc., should have received. I use the word talking points, but here's the messaging. Here's what we're going to be saying, and I don't think Trump does that. Remember, look, Bill Kristol has gone crazy in his
Some of
later
it is done,
years.
but go ahead. Yeah.
So Bill Kristol has gone crazy in his later years, but he was a pioneer in this. When he was chief of staff to Dan Quayle, what he did every morning was send out a fax to all the allies on here's the agenda, or here's what we're talking about today. And the fact of the matter is, it worked. It was, and I don't understand why there's no one in this White House who is coordinating with allies and proxies and others. Here's where we're going today.
It's the coordination that's the important thing, right? And because I think some of this is
And
being
there's
done. Hold on,
zero
hold on.
on the
Some of this is
on the
some of
MAGA
it's being
side.
done. Some of it's being done passively, right? So there is a rapid response Twitter account that collects and collects the audio and video clips of various administration associated pundits. And clips of the president sort of getting things out there, but it's passive. You have to know where to go for it. There is no myths versus facts, right? There should have been, you're absolutely correct. As soon as I want to say it was Cato that put out, we've corrected your chart for you. There should have been an immediate rapid response sent out to everybody. Okay, here's where Cato is wrong in all of this.
Right.
Here is what the facts are. Here's how we came out with these things. And it gets down to what you were saying, right? Which is this issue of uh, whether it's competence or incompetence or what have you, the reality is that this administration is under such greater scrutiny, and I would dare say that the stakes are so much higher that they need to be better at this. Now, I think they're better than they were 4 years ago, 8 years ago. Sorry, they're better than they were 8 years ago. But that was a total shambles in 2017. We have to learn so much more now, in terms of getting that messaging out.
The two things that Donald Trump has going for him, it's his own fortitude.
Yeah.
Unlike other politicians or elected leaders, they can be pushed back onto their heels. We saw in 2017 that with all the criticism, everyone was against his tax cuts. Even
Right.
Republicans were against his tax cuts. Trump didn't care. He kept walking forward, kept walking forward. That is unique in terms of Republican politics. Republicans fall back and they concede, they compromise, or they quit. Trump doesn't quit. That's number one. Number two, there is a new uh, and growing uh, media, alternative media,
Yeah.
where these voices did not exist 8 years ago, and that that alternative media, and I'm thinking of Substackers and Sasha Stone and these types, former Democrats, by Matt
Right.
Taibbi. Think about this. Some of the best defenders of Trump policy are former Democrats
Right.
who have been horrified by the censorship from the Bidens and have been horrified by the Democrats' surrender and their treatment of the working class Americans. But the thing is, the Trump administration, its communications, and then in the agencies need to better connect with these voices who have audiences
Yeah.
because the other side's winning the argument, and you can see it. Trump's approval ratings are still pretty good. He's at 50-50 or
Yeah. I mean,
thereabouts.
listen, and again,
Uh,
they're better than they were 8 years ago,
right.
which is the
But
metric,
but if
right?
you notice, and again, if you notice week by week, the constant legacy media
Right.
untruths and half stories and the Democrats, it's wearing down,
But
and
that's the
Trump should,
goal. I mean,
but
and here's
right,
the
but
thing,
but that's why Trump should be I
a
say
hundred
Trump,
percent, right?
but
But
that's why
also,
Trump world should be partnering with these proxies and these honest brokers to get their message out, and they're not doing it.
and to be telling the story better that this is the goal, right? The Bulwark made it really clear in December, right? Our goal, dealing with Trump in one chart was, I think, the title of the Bulwark piece, and the goal was to just the constant din, the 95%, relentless negative coverage against Trump. Jerry, I want to listen. I want to turn our attention to something else because you and I had a conversation yesterday.
Before he leaves, I just want
Yep.
to add one very important point, and
Yeah.
that is because Trump is done in essentially 3.5 years. There is a scramble happening right now for who will be the top dog, so to speak, in Republican conservative politics in 3 years and 2 years, right? And there's a lot of backstabbing, there's a lot of leveraging, there's a lot of betrayal, and this is happening. And I won't name names right now, but I think I've talked to you offline about this.
Yeah.
Some very heavy hitters, men and women who you and I have supported and praised, are working now behind the scenes
Yes.
to hurt Trump because they see it as an opportunity for power later.
Right.
And this is also, not only is Trump having to fight the legacy media and the Democrats and the establishment, but there is this political vibe happening for power when Trump leaves office.
Well, I mean,
And
that
this
and
is this
that's
is this is crazy.
and that's but there's always been this jockeying within the Trump world for this. You know, you see the sort of the changes over time and who was undermining who in order to be brought in and
But
the
now
change.
what's happening is you see former allies not just trying to bring down Trump or Trump allies, but they're trying to bring down uh, rivals in the media or rivals in business. My
Right,
last word on this: Tesla. Liberals brought Teslas to be virtue signalers, the
right.
virtue signal. Look at me, I bought a Tesla. Now they're literally burning down Teslas and they're protesting outside Tesla dealerships because they're virtue signaling. But a lot of this is rooted in political rage and rage rhetoric and political
Yes.
violence. Um, there is a component of that on the right that is happening under the current, where their rivals are trying to push out and hurt others.
Right.
And this is we need to put the working class interest, the American interest first, and there's a real challenge right now. And so,
Listen, I
yeah,
mean, you know something? I wrote a piece on not using the Department of Agriculture policies regarding food stamps
yeah,
as and I was and all kinds of people came out of the
yeah.
woodwork
Hey,
to
Andrew, I know
criticize
I
me
know
there.
that you want to change topics.
No,
I'm
that's not
I'm
what I
on,
want to talk about. I want to talk
but I
I
have
want to talk
a
about this
I
proxy vote issue, Jerry, because
yeah.
you've been able to distill it. But go ahead, Jerry. I know you want to say something about this.
No, I'm just saying that unfortunately, I have a hard out
Oh.
in 8 minutes.
In 8 minutes. Uh-oh. Well, then good. Then perfect. Then let me ask you, because you and I had this conversation about the proxy issue. Apparently, Donald Trump is supporting Anna Paulina Luna on this. I am you had me convinced yesterday about this issue. Folks, for those of you who don't understand what's going on, in essence, Anna Paulina Luna, who's a young member of Congress from Florida, I think it is.
From
uh,
Florida, there's a piece of the Real Clear Policy today that calls her a coddled princess.
Okay, but the point is, she wants to engage and have a rule change in Congress where if you are a new parent, man or woman, you can invoke some kind of maternity, paternity leave, parental leave for the first 12 weeks after the baby is born, so you can vote by proxy and manage to get a discharge petition out, which means that the House has to vote on it. Mike Johnson caught by surprise on this, actually essentially shut down House floor business over this because he doesn't like it. And he has good reasons for not liking it. And then the president came out yesterday and said that he supports this. But this is a problem, Jerry, isn't it?
It's a huge problem. And again, uh, if we allow for proxy voting, if we allow members of Congress to vote from home, which could be 2,000 miles away, well, then think about the Mitch Daniels, the Dianne Feinsteins. Think about the problem we have with men and women in Congress unable to perform their duties
Right.
when we see them. Imagine if we didn't see them. Who would be pulling those levers? Who would be pulling those votes? Number one. Number two, Congress already doesn't do its job. It
Right.
doesn't budget. It doesn't do the things Congress is supposed to do. It doesn't write legislation that's specific. It leaves too much leeway to regulators. And then so this would be another way Congress is just relinquishing authority and power and duty
It is
to the other branches of government.
It is so vital, as Jerry and I were talking about this, it is so vital within the context of any kind of political business and policy business to have informal conversations with people who may be on a different page than you are in terms of getting things done. And so much historically has happened behind the scenes. And there's a big difference between a
How do you
phone call.
participate in
Hold on,
committee
hold on.
hearings or floor amendment votes or debates if you're at home in your bedroom proxy voting?
But also the issue of, as you pointed out to me, the informal meetings, the lunch meetings, et cetera, the conversations that you have offline that you absolutely cannot have via Zoom, which is a formalized setting. the chit chat that goes on. This is what we're talking about generally. And then let me add to this, this is essentially a one-off, right? We're talking about accountability and decision making, right? We've just gone through this whole thing where we're having a discussion over the use of the auto pen. And what does it really mean if the president's not actually signing legislation? Who is actually making the decision to sign that legislation,
Yeah.
or and decide to not
They
veto it,
should
something
do
they don't
away
agree
with
with?
the auto pen. We should not have proxy voting. The working man, working woman, sure, get paternity leave, that's fine. But when you show, you got to show up for work. And this idea of proxy voting is, again, it's so dangerous. Our founders understood the importance of the legislature.
Right.
And what's happening greater and greater is the legislature, the Congress is relinquishing and giving power to both the courts, well, both the courts and the regulators, and then consequently to the executive. This is dangerous for the republic. It's dangerous for our friends on the left who want democracy and want
All right.
transparency.
Somebody ought to drop to National Review and reason the issue of, and I don't know who wrote the coddled piece, but if you're concerned about Trump
Scott
being a
McKay,
fascist.
Scott McKay from the
Oh,
American
sure.
Spectator
Yeah.
wrote
Hey,
wrote a good
all
piece
right,
on this.
Jerry, we got 3.5 minutes before you have your heart out. Torpedo
Yeah.
bats.
Oh, thumbs up.
Yeah.
Yeah, technology is good.
I'm
It's
very
it's
excited.
not it's not against the rules. Anyone who is complaining, I'm sorry, you don't know baseball. I hate to use this word because my mom said never use it, but you're an idiot.
Yeah.
If you're
So
if you're
I'm
complaining
I'm
about
looking.
torpedo
Listen,
bats, you're an
listen.
idiot.
Yankees coming to Camden Yards in 3 weeks. I'm gonna go, and I'm excited to see the torpedo bats at work. Jerry, how do folks find out more about the good work that you're doing, my friend?
Real Clear Policy, Real Clear Health, the Business of America podcast, WBAL Radio, and of course X at Jerry Rogers Show.
I am in for Tony Katz on the 17th of April, noon to 3, WIBC, nationally syndicated. Great new episode of the Lunch Hour with Federal Newswire coming out on Monday. I interview Fred de Fossard from the Prosperity Institute in the UK. You're going to want to check that out. Jerry, what do you want folks to do?
Find the truth, plant your feet, and stand firm. God bless you.
Have a great week, everybody. Have fun, and please stay safe.